All right, welcome to the SnydeReport. I am your host, Gary Snyder. Before we get started and introduce our guest, we need to thank Robin Winston, a fine sponsor of this podcast and our newsletter that goes out to 100,000 subscribers daily. Now, my guest today, Adam Kinzinger. He may be a face you've seen on TV lately. So, Adam, welcome.
Thanks. They probably haven't seen the beard, though. That's making a slight comeback for at least another couple days. Who knows how long?
You know, I haven't shaved in a week. So,
perfect.
You know, I used to think, well, God, I can't grow anything. But, you know, as you get older, it's almost a blessing instead of a curse.
That's right. It is.
So, former congressman, now TV pundit, I guess.
Sure.
You know, as we take a look at the Trump administration here in the first several weeks of its start, is it everything you expected it to be?
And more, way worse. I mean, look, I was kind of using as a roadmap the first Trump administration, which, while I had my disagreements, at least for the first couple of years, was pretty normal, had normal people in the administration, were able to push back against Trump. This is, you know, when I was a kid, I read that story, The Emperor's New Clothes, and this is exactly that. I mean, he has surrounded himself with people that won't tell him no, and, you know, everybody's just plotting how they can somehow manipulate him to get his way. But yeah, I think we're what, 8 weeks into this thing, and it feels like it's already been 3 years. It's a little worrisome.
Why does Congress abdicate its responsibility so much to him?
I mean, it's a great question, because the same people right now that are abdicating their responsibility were always the ones when I was in that were always talking about how Congress needs to get back its role. And, you know, we need, particularly, of course, when Obama was president, we need to, you know, make sure that we have our say and our strength, and we're the main branch of government. And right now, I think, look, over 10 years of Donald Trump's existence in the political world, they basically thinned out the herd of anybody that was willing to stand up for their rights, to stand up for their district, to stand up against the president in the party. And you just you've been left after a 10-year basically war against sanity. You've been left with people that are either whipped puppies and are scared to death to tell the truth, or they fully believe this stuff. And unfortunately, that's the place we're at. And the Democrats, frankly, have not done much better at offering any resistance. I mean, showing some paddles and stuff is kind of a weird way to exercise your power in the U.S. House. So it's disappointing, and we're turning into a de facto kind of authoritarian state without a Congress.
You know, who thought that would be a good idea to hold up the little bingo cards?
This is where, look, it's you know, you think of the Democrats during you know, Obama administration, and it's like they have to change and recognize it's a different battle now. There's different techniques. The paddle thing doesn't work, and dressing in the same colors doesn't work anymore.
You know, when I first saw that, and as a Democrat, I'm thinking to myself, what the are they doing?
Yep.
I mean, now the lady that held up the little whiteboard that said this is not normal, that was good, you know, and when they kicked the congressman out, maybe they should have all left with him. Maybe that would have had more of an effect, but wearing the pink and holding the little paddles up, it was almost embarrassing.
And honestly, it feeds into this idea, you know, that the Democrats' problem right now, and 15 years ago, this wasn't the issue. The Democrats' problem is they're losing men at a massive clip. This is why they're losing. They're doing fine among women. And, you know, it's hard to explain, but protests like that, it kind of turns men off, and they're like, well, that's not a party that's fighting. That's just a party that's showing, I don't know, things, and not something I want to be part of. This is the real battle for the Democrats over the next 10 years, is winning back young men, particularly, that they have lost, a generation that's gone. And it's a battle not just for Democrats, a battle for men, too, to fight.
Why have they lost men? I mean, when you take a look at what the Democrats stand for, at least for the working man, and always have, and unions and working families, and I see it. I have relatives. You have relatives. You see it everywhere that, you know, a lot of times, and especially white men, non-college educated white men, people that sit in the union halls are turned away from the Democrat Party, and assimilated themselves in the MAGA.
So it's a couple of things. So from particularly the union perspective, because I was always a Republican that had union support, and what I noticed is, so the Democrats became a place that used to allow, for instance, people that had a different view on the Second Amendment, right? You used to have, and the vast majority of union members, white union members, are pro-Second Amendment. They're gun owners. They may have a slightly different view on abortion and some of those kind of cultural type issues, but economically they're Democratic voters. Well, the parties, and both parties have done this, but we're going to pick on the Democrats for a moment. They have begun to self-select and say that you can't have a different view on guns or you can't have a different view on abortion in the party. And that has then alienated these otherwise Democratic voters to identify more with the cultural fight than with the economic fight. And then, of course, Trump gives lip service. And I think, the fact that the economy may be entering some turmoil could change this, but Trump gives lip service to fighting for the middle class. And I think that's part of it. The other part with young men, though, is if you look for the last 10 or 15 years, masculinity was frowned upon. I mean, it took me even a while to talk about masculinity to feel like I wasn't going to get attacked from the left for talking about it. And young men were told that masculinity is something to be embarrassed about or everything's toxic. And they felt homeless. They felt like they didn't have a place. And then Donald Trump comes along and presents actual toxic masculinity, by the way, but a version of it that in a vacuum attracted these Gen Zers. He's like, look, if you tweet in all caps, you're mean to women, Andrew Tate, you sexually traffic women, that's masculinity. And I think that's what's drawn this Gen Z generation. And it's really sad because that is a toxic version of masculinity.
It is. I ran for Congress, I guess it's 3 years ago, ran against someone who was actually appointed to the January 6th Commission and was kicked off, Jim Banks, who's now our U.S. Senator. Exactly.
Sorry about that.
And as a former Republican, I experienced that from a lot of Democrats.
Yeah.
You can't go out there and say, well, no, maybe children shouldn't get sex changes until they're 18 and can make their own choice. Maybe men shouldn't be playing girls' sports in high school and college. And you get attacked for it. And you're not a real Democrat if you don't, line up point for point.
Yeah, and this is the question for the Democrats is, do you want to be like, pure to your ideology that you believe, or do you want to win elections? Because honestly, it's a much better position to be in a place where you can have disagreements on these issues within the party, but you're in power versus sitting out of power. And then you're just basically sitting on a rocking chair yelling out into the wind because you have no power to do anything. And you get people that maybe have a different view on men and women's sports, for instance, but now instead you have people in power that are going over the top on everything. And so it's an important question for Democrats. And honestly, I think Democrats are far better at being able to accept differences now in the party than they were, and also certainly better than the Republicans are. So I think from a health perspective, that bodes well for Democrats. But again, I would say, there are going to be people on the center right, people like me, that you can either bring in or you can kick out. And that's going to be the difference between do we take power or not.
And I think Republicans have learned long ago that whether they have no shame, whatever the case may be, getting that power is the absolute pinnacle of what you need to reach.
That's 100% true. And, look, I've been in Congress. I was there since the very beginning of 2011. And, we worked through this. We had the far right kind of coming in and, we made a decision, not me, I was opposed to this, but collectively as a party made a decision to adopt the far right in, somehow thinking we could change them. And it's cancer, right? If you have some cancer in your body, your good cells aren't going to overwhelm the cancer cells. The cancer cells eventually are going to overwhelm the good cells. That's the situation in the party. But we recognized that we had to win. And guess what? We did win. And Republicans are in complete control now. And if you'd have asked me in the Obama years if there was ever going to be a time in which Republicans significantly ran this country again, I would have said no. I assumed they were going to be a regional party forever. And they found a way to climb back. And this is an important message for Democrats is it's not going to be your far left you have to bring in. It's going to be the center to get to that 51%.
I was having a conversation last night with John Fugelsang, and he brought up Gavin Newsom, who, by all accounts, is probably one of the leading contenders for 2028 for the Democrats. He had Charlie Kirk on his show, and he really wasn't upset that he had Charlie Kirk on his new podcast. He was upset that he didn't challenge him for being a racist, for being a misogynist, for being a Nazi, if you will. And you can go down the line. Now Steve Bannon, and it's ironic that you had some not so nice words for Gavin Newsom today regarding that guest.
Yeah, look, it's one thing to say, if you're Gavin Newsom, hey, I'm going to bring some kind of thinkers on the right onto the podcast, and we're going to talk about these issues. I'd be all for that. Have some writers at the Dispatch, Jonah Goldberg or somebody on the podcast to discuss the academic differences between the right and left. When you platform a guy who is very anti-small d Democratic, he's an authoritarian. Charlie Kirk was bad enough, but I'm like, okay, I'll let that one go. Steve Bannon not only bilked his supporters out of money and is facing the judicial system for that now because of the wall. We sent him to jail on the committee because he refused to come in and testify. This is the guy that authored the idea of just overwhelm them with S word, and that way the media won't be able to keep up with what's going on. Flood the zone. This is the author of what we're dealing with now. Gavin Newsom brings him on his podcast to pretend like that's a legitimate viewpoint in a democratic society, and he just wants to understand him when this is the guy causing the problem. Look, I am all for bipartisanship. I am all for people holding hands and getting along. But when it comes to authoritarianism, that has no place in our country. And Gavin Newsom, I think, has torched his presidential prospects with this. And if he hasn't, I'm going to make sure that he has. Because this is, like, transparently a guy who simply wants to win an election and doesn't hold to any standards. And I think this country needs to be over that kind of a person. I've heard the rumor, true or not, maybe it's like this kind of because of what he did, that he was considering having, Stephen Miller on. Obviously, it's only going to get worse.
How does that help? I mean, who whispers in his ear and said, "Hey, why don't you have Steve Bannon on your podcast?
That'll devil?
Help you win
the devil?
That'll help you win the election in 2028.
Yeah, it doesn't make sense. And, it's going to tick off your base, and then you're not going to win over any MAGAs. So I don't understand it. Look, it's one thing for him. He said, hey, I'm now opposed to men and women's sports. Fine. You're going to take some flack from the left for that. But if it's a principled position, great. It's another thing to platform people that don't believe. Many of us here, you and I, we spent a career fighting these people, and we lost a career fighting these people. And now Gavin Newsom's going to platform them like it's legitimate. It's not.
Well, you have a book out. It's right behind me here. Renegade: Defending Democracy and Liberty in a Divided Country. Why don't you talk a little bit about your book and what made you decide to write one?
Look, I didn't want to write a book. I hate writing. I'm going to be honest, right? I have a Substack too. I hate writing for that, but it's important.
I hate running, so yeah, I mean,
perfect. Then we're similar.
No writing, no running.
That's right. But I realized that, because I'm like, who wants to know the Adam Kinzinger story? But I realized that my story is actually a microcosm of what's happened to the GOP. If you read my story, and I talk about the broader implications as well, but you see how the Republican Party went from kind of your grandpa's Republican Party to, your older brother's Republican Party that's getting a little crazy to the unrecognizable situation we're in now. So that's why I wrote it. I enjoyed it. And if you take a look, if you want, I think you'll learn something from it, and appreciate it.
What's the number one thing you think someone will learn from your book that maybe they don't know already?
Well, I think probably just that we could have won this battle. There are so many moments in the last 15 years that there was one decision, for instance, that could have, I think, saved the Republican Party. And each decision, the cowardice path was taken, which was the wrong path. And I think particularly after January 6th, for about 3 weeks, not a single Republican was talking about Donald Trump. Keep in mind, Donald Trump, when he left D.C., nobody was even at Andrews for his for his exit.
Right.
We had an opportunity to take over the party, but Kevin McCarthy made the decision to go to Mar-a-Lago, and that changed history. And I think it's important to see those moments because we have to learn from them. If we think history is just an entertaining thing and not going to happen again, we're wrong. We're going to be faced with those moments again. Maybe even Democrats will.
Before we let you go, I just need again thank our sponsor, Robin Winston, does a great job of supporting us here at the podcast and on the daily newsletter. He's Adam Kinzinger. I'm Gary Snyder. Thank you very much for joining me today.
Thanks.